At my son's 5th wedding anniversary party, my daughter-in-law stood up in front of 73 guests, raised her champagne glass, and announced, "Special thanks to Annie, who's always hungry for attention and free meals." I'm Annie Whitman. I'm 68 years old. I smiled, folded my napkin, and quietly left the party. What Rebecca didn't know was that I owned the company she worked for. What she didn't know was that the free meal she mocked cost less than the minute it took her to insult me, a minute I was paying for, since I owned 67% of Preston Industries, where she pulled her $200,000 salary. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. Let me take you back to where this really started. Not at that anniversary party, but 43 years ago, when I was a 25-year-old black woman trying to survive in a world that didn't want me to succeed. It was August 1981 when I met Daniel Whitman at a manufacturing conference in Chicago. I was there representing the small consulting firm where I worked, the only black woman in a room of 200 white men in suits. Daniel was a mechanical engineer presenting a paper on pharmaceutical waste reduction. He had kind eyes and terrible public speaking skills. When he dropped his entire stack of presentation slides, I was the only person who helped him pick them up. "Thank you," he said, his face red with embarrassment. "I'm Daniel." "Annie," I replied. "And your research is brilliant, even if your slide organization isn't." He laughed. We got coffee. That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into letters. This was 1981. We wrote actual letters. 6 months later, he proposed in a letter that was 3 pages long and included a hand-drawn diagram of why we belonged together. His family disowned him when we married in May 1982. Not because I wasn't educated. I had my MBA from Northwestern by then. Not because I wasn't from a good family. My father was a postal worker, my mother a teacher, both respected in our Atlanta community. They disowned him because I was black, and in 1982, that was still enough. "They'll come around," Daniel said on our wedding day, where his side of the church held exactly 4 people, his college roommate, his roommate's wife, and 2 of his work colleagues who came out of pity. They never came around. But we built a life anyway. Daniel worked as an engineer for Morrison Pharmaceuticals. I worked as a business consultant, helping small companies streamline their operations. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom house in Evanston, Illinois. We were happy in the way that people who choose each other against the world's advice tend to be, fiercely, defensively happy. Michael was born in January 1989, 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Perfect. That same year, Daniel developed a revolutionary process for reducing pharmaceutical manufacturing waste by 43%. He filed the patent through his employer, as his contract required. Morrison Pharmaceuticals promised him a promotion, a bonus, and recognition. Instead, they fired him. They claimed the patent was theirs, which it was technically, but they also claimed Daniel had stolen the underlying research from another employee. That was a lie. We knew it. Daniel knew it. But lies don't matter when you're fighting a corporation with unlimited legal resources, and you're a white man married to a black woman in 1989 America. We sued. It took 10 years. 10 years of legal bills that drained every penny we had. 10 years of Daniel working contract jobs that paid half what he was worth because Morrison had blacklisted him in the industry. 10 years of me working 60-hour weeks to keep us afloat while raising Michael. 10 years of watching my brilliant husband slowly crumble under the weight of what they'd stolen from him. We won the case in 1998. The court awarded Daniel his patent rights back, plus $1.2 million in damages and lost wages. We thought we'd finally beaten them. But Morrison Pharmaceuticals had already made $47 million from Daniel's process. They'd licensed it to 6 other companies. They'd built entire production lines around it. And they'd done it all while my husband worked night shifts at a warehouse to pay our mortgage. Daniel was never the same after that. Oh, he smiled for Michael. He celebrated our victory. He took the settlement money and immediately set up a college fund for our son. He bought me a new car. Nothing fancy, just a reliable Honda Accord. He paid off our house. But something inside him had broken. In November 2003, I found him in the garage with the car running. I got there in time. I called 911. They pumped his stomach, kept him for 72 hours, sent him home with a prescription and a referral to a therapist he never called. That night, sitting in our kitchen at 3 in the morning, Daniel cried in my arms. "I failed you," he said. "I failed Michael. I let them take everything." "You didn't let them take anything," I told him. "They stole it. And you fought back. You won." "Did I?" He looked at me with eyes that had given up. "Annie, promise me something. Anything. Don't let Michael know how weak I was. Don't let him see me like this. Let him think his father was strong. Let him build his own strength. You are strong, Daniel. Promise me," he insisted. "Whatever happens, you protect him from this. You make sure he never has to feel this helpless. Promise me you'll be strong enough for both of us." I promised. I shouldn't have, but I did. Daniel died of lung cancer on March 14th, 2005. He'd never smoked a day in his life, but stress is its own kind of poison. The doctors said the cancer was aggressive, the kind that moves fast. He was diagnosed in January, gone by March. He was 53 years old. His family didn't come to the funeral. Michael was 16. He cried for 3 days straight, then stopped crying altogether. He became focused, driven, determined to succeed in ways his father never had. He threw himself into school, into sports, into anything that would prove he was strong enough to survive what life threw at him. I was 42 years old, a widow with a teenage son, and exactly $53,000 in savings, what was left after Daniel's medical bills. I also had Daniel's patent, which was generating about $60,000 a year in licensing fees. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. I made a decision that night after Daniel's funeral, sitting alone in our kitchen where I'd promised him I'd be strong. I would never let anyone make me feel powerless again. Not corporations, not racism, not grief. And I would build something so solid, so unshakable, that Michael would never have to fight the way his father did. But I would do it quietly, because in 1982, they'd punished Daniel for loving me. In 1989, they'd punished him for being brilliant while married to me. In 2005, I learned that the world punishes Black women even more severely for being powerful. So I decided to be powerful in secret. Between 2005 and 2010, Daniel's patent became my foundation. The licensing fees increased as more pharmaceutical companies adopted his waste reduction process. By 2007, I was earning $180,000 annually from that single patent. By 2009, it was $240,000. But I lived like I was still struggling. I kept the same house in Evanston. I drove the same Honda Accord. I shopped at Target, not Neiman Marcus. I told everyone I worked as a small-time business consultant helping local companies with their operations. Which was true. I did do that work. I just didn't mention that I was also using Daniel's patent money to quietly buy those struggling companies. My first acquisition was in 2006, a failing business consulting firm in Milwaukee called Peterson & Associates. They were drowning in debt, losing clients, and desperate. I bought them for $78,000 cash. I restructured their operations, kept their name, installed a competent manager, and stayed completely behind the scenes. Within 18 months, Peterson & Associates was profitable. Within 3 years, they doubled their client base. I did the same thing 4 more times between 2006 and 2015. Found struggling consulting firms, bought them for cash, fixed them, made them profitable, kept my name off everything. By 2015, I owned 6 consulting firms across the Midwest. Each operated independently, each was profitable, each bore someone else's name. I called my holding company Whitman Strategic Solutions, but almost nobody knew it existed. Michael graduated from Northwestern in 2011 with a degree in marketing. He got a job at a small agency in Chicago. He struggled. The work was hard, the pay was mediocre, the hours were terrible. I watched him fight his way up, just like I'd planned, just like I'd promised Daniel. I never offered to help, never mentioned my businesses, never told him that I could have made one phone call and gotten him any job he wanted. Because I'd promised Daniel I'd make Michael strong. And strength comes from struggle. At least that's what I told myself. Preston Industries came into my life in November 2018. They were a mid-sized business consulting firm based in Chicago, similar to the ones I already owned, but bigger. 47 employees, $12 million in annual revenue. They'd been successful in the late 2000s, but had made bad investments during the 2008 recession. By 2018, they were technically profitable but functionally bankrupt, drowning in debt, hemorrhaging clients, and 6 months away from closure. Their CEO, Richard Preston, was 74 years old and exhausted. He wanted to retire. His children didn't want the business. His management team was in chaos. I made him an offer through my attorney. I would buy 67% of Preston Industries for $8.3 million cash. He would keep 20% and stay on as a figurehead president for 2 years to ease the transition. The remaining 13% would be distributed among key employees. Richard accepted in 48 hours. The sale closed on January 15, 2019. Richard announced that Preston Industries had been acquired by a private investment group committed to maintaining the company's values and growth. No one asked who the investment group was. No one cared, as long as their jobs were safe. I installed Patricia Hughes, a brilliant 46-year-old operations director who'd been with Preston for 12 years, as chief operating officer. I gave her full authority to run daily operations. I remained completely invisible. Why Preston Industries specifically? 2 reasons. First, they were big enough to matter, but small enough to hide in. Second, I had a feeling that whoever Michael married would eventually want to work in consulting, and I wanted control over that environment. I didn't know it would be Rebecca. Not yet. That revelation came 6 months later, in June 2017. Michael met Rebecca in June 2017 at a marketing conference in downtown Chicago. She was 27 years old, beautiful, polished, and working as a junior sales representative at a small marketing firm. She had an MBA from DePaul University and the kind of ambition that announces itself before you even shake her hand. Michael brought her to Sunday dinner 3 weeks after they met. "Mom, this is Rebecca," he said. His face lit up with the kind of hope I hadn't seen since before his father died. "Rebecca, this is my mom, Annie." "Mrs. Whitman," Rebecca said, extending her hand with a smile that was professionally warm but emotionally cold. "Michael has told me so much about you." She wore a designer suit that cost at least $800. I know because I'd learned to recognize quality clothing as camouflage for my own wealth. Her shoes were Louboutins. Her watch was Kate Spade. Her entire outfit cost more than I'd spent on clothes in a year, at least publicly. We shook hands. Her grip was firm, calculated. Her eyes swept over my kitchen, the outdated appliances, the linoleum floors I'd never bothered to replace, the table Daniel and I had bought used in 1985. I saw the assessment in her eyes, the judgment, the dismissal. "Your home is lovely," Rebecca said in the tone people use when they mean the opposite. "Very authentic." "Thank you," I replied. "Can I get you some iced tea? I made it fresh this morning." "Oh, I don't drink sugar," Rebecca said with an apologetic smile. "But water would be wonderful." Throughout dinner, Rebecca talked about her job, her goals, her 5-year plan to become a senior sales director. She asked me exactly 3 questions, all of them designed to establish my place in the social hierarchy below hers. "So you do consulting work? What kind of clients? Do you work from home or do you have an office? That must be nice, having such a flexible schedule at your age." Michael didn't notice. He was too busy watching her like she was the answer to every question he'd never known he had. I noticed everything. The way she checked her phone 6 times during dinner. The way she subtly corrected Michael's grammar when he spoke. The way she called me Michael's mom instead of Annie or Mrs. Whitman, as if I existed only in relation to him. After they left, I sat in my kitchen and did something I rarely did. I drank an entire glass of wine by myself. Then I made a phone call. "James?" I said when my private investigator answered. "I need a background check. Full workup, employment history, financial records, previous relationships, everything." James Porter had been my investigator since 2012, when I needed to vet a potential business acquisition. He was 62 years old, a retired Chicago police detective, and he knew how to be thorough without being obvious. "Who's the subject?" James asked. "Rebecca Ann Sterling," I said, 27 years old, currently employed at Trendmark Solutions. "And James, I need this done quietly." "They're always quiet, Mrs. Whitman," he replied. "How soon do you need it?" 2 weeks. The report came back in 10 days. Rebecca Ann Sterling wasn't her real name. She was born Rebecca Ann Morrison in Indianapolis, Indiana, on March 12, 1990. Her father, Gerald Morrison, owned a small construction company that went bankrupt when Rebecca was 15. Her mother, Patricia Morrison, left the family when Rebecca was 12, just walked out one day and never came back. Rebecca grew up poor, not struggling to get by poor, poor, free lunch at school poor, Goodwill clothes poor, eviction notices on the door poor. She was also brilliant, full scholarship to Indiana University, perfect GPA, MBA from DePaul with honors. Every teacher she ever had described her the same way: exceptionally intelligent, extremely driven, and surprisingly cold. What James's report also showed was a pattern. At 23, Rebecca dated Thomas Brennan, the son of the owner of a small manufacturing company in Indianapolis. The relationship lasted 8 months. During that time, the manufacturing company lost 3 major clients to a competitor who somehow knew exactly what to bid and when. Thomas's father suspected industrial espionage but could never prove anything. Rebecca and Thomas broke up 2 weeks before his father's company declared bankruptcy. At 25, Rebecca married Kevin Chen, a software engineer who developed a promising app for restaurant management. They were married for 14 months. During that time, Kevin's app was mysteriously cloned by a larger company that released a nearly identical product 3 months before Kevin could finish his launch. Kevin sued for intellectual property theft, but lost. The other company claimed they'd been developing their product independently. Rebecca filed for divorce 1 week after Kevin lost the lawsuit. She left the marriage with $54,000 from their joint accounts. At 27, she started dating my son. 3 months after that, she changed her name legally from Rebecca Morrison to Rebecca Sterling. Fresh start, clean slate, new identity. I closed James's report and sat at my kitchen table for an hour, not moving. My son was dating a professional con artist who targeted men connected to money and businesses. She'd already destroyed 2 people's livelihoods. Now she was dating Michael, whose mother she assumed was a poor widow living off her dead husband's meager savings. What Rebecca didn't know was that Michael's poor widow mother owned 6 consulting firms worth a combined $43 million. What Rebecca didn't know was that I had just bought Preston Industries, one of the largest consulting firms in Chicago. What Rebecca didn't know was that I was watching her every move. I should have told Michael immediately. I should have shown him James's report, explained who Rebecca really was, and protected my son from a woman who was obviously planning to use him. But I didn't. Why? Because of the promise I made to Daniel. Because I'd spent 13 years teaching Michael to be strong by forcing him to struggle. Because I was terrified that if I swooped in to save him, I'd prove that he couldn't survive on his own. Because I was afraid he'd resent me for having the power to help him and choosing not to. Because I was afraid he'd see me the way Rebecca saw me, as someone who'd been lucky, not someone who'd been strategic. So instead of protecting my son, I decided to protect myself. I decided to watch, to wait, to gather evidence, to let Rebecca reveal herself fully before I intervened. I told myself I was being wise, strategic, patient. What I was really being was a coward. Michael proposed to Rebecca in April 2019. They'd been dating for 22 months. He called me the night he bought the ring, a 2-carat diamond that cost him $11,000, which was everything he'd saved for the past 3 years. "Mom, I'm going to ask Rebecca to marry me," he said, his voice shaking with excitement and terror. "I know it's fast, but I love her. She makes me want to be better. She makes me feel like I can do anything." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, my heart breaking. "I'm so happy for you. You like her, right? I know she can seem intense sometimes, but she's amazing when you get to know her." I could have stopped it right there. I could have said, "Michael, we need to talk about Rebecca. There are things you don't know." I could have shown him the report. I could have been honest. Instead, I said, "She makes you happy. That's all that matters to me." Rebecca said yes. They set the wedding date for October 12th, 2019. Rebecca immediately began planning what she called the wedding of the century. She wanted Riverside Country Club, the most expensive venue in the Chicago area. She wanted 200 guests. She wanted a dress that cost $9,000. She wanted everything perfect, everything expensive, everything designed to announce that she had arrived. The total cost was going to be $147,000. Michael's savings, $11,000, which he'd spent on the ring. Rebecca's savings. She claimed she had about $20,000 set aside. Rebecca came to me 3 weeks after the engagement. We met for lunch at a cafe in downtown Chicago, her choice. She arrived wearing a Chanel jacket and carrying a Louis Vuitton handbag. She ordered a $12 salad and spent 10 minutes telling the server exactly how she wanted it prepared. Then she looked at me with the kind of smile people use when they're about to ask for something they've already decided they deserve. "Annie," she said, "I wanted to talk to you about the wedding." "Of course," I replied. "How can I help?" "Well, Michael and I have been discussing the budget and we're a bit short. We were hoping—" She paused, arranging her face into an expression of humble embarrassment that didn't reach her eyes. "We were hoping you might be able to contribute." "How much were you thinking?" I asked. "The venue alone is $75,000, Rebecca said. "And then there's the catering, the photographer, the flowers. Annie, I know this might be difficult for you financially. Michael mentioned you live modestly, but this is your only son's wedding. I was hoping you could maybe contribute $50,000? I know it's a lot, but we'd structure payments so you could manage it over time." $50,000. Structured payments. Like I was taking out a loan to watch my son marry a con artist. I took a sip of my coffee. Black, no sugar, $1.50. "I'll write you a check for the full amount," I said. $150,000. That should cover everything and give you a small cushion. Rebecca's eyes widened. "Annie, are you sure? That's incredibly generous. I have some savings," I said calmly. "Daniel was careful with money, and I've made some good investments over the years." It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. Rebecca's shock lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then it transformed into something else. Calculation. I could see her mind working, recalibrating. If the poor widow could produce $150,000 cash, what else might she have hidden? "Thank you," Rebecca said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Michael is so lucky to have such a generous mother. We both are." I wrote the check that afternoon. $150,000 from an account that held $42 million. The wedding was beautiful. Rebecca wore her $9,000 dress. 200 people attended. The venue was spectacular. Everything was perfect. Michael's side of the church. 40 people, mostly his friends from work and college. Rebecca's side, 8 people. She claimed her parents couldn't come. Her mother was sick. Her father had work commitments. Her only family present was an aunt from Indianapolis who looked uncomfortable the entire time and left immediately after the ceremony. During the reception, Rebecca gave a speech thanking everyone who'd made the day possible. She thanked the vendors. She thanked her friends. She thanked Michael's colleagues. She thanked me with exactly 12 words. "And thank you to Annie, who generously contributed to our special day." No hug, no real gratitude, just an acknowledgement that I'd paid for her performance. That night, alone in my house, I opened my laptop and checked the financial reports for my 6 companies. Together, they generated $8.4 million in profit that year. I'd just spent $150,000 to watch my son marry a woman who was already planning how to steal from me. And I'd done it because I was too afraid to tell him the truth. Welcome to Act 2 of my story, where I stopped being afraid and started being strategic. The first sign that Rebecca was hunting came 3 months after the wedding, during our monthly Sunday dinner at Michael and Rebecca's new apartment. They'd moved into a high-rise in Lincoln Park, a 2-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Rent was $4,200 a month. Michael's salary covered about half. Rebecca claimed her sales commissions covered the rest. I brought homemade peach cobbler, the same recipe I'd been making since Michael was 6 years old. "Annie, you shouldn't have," Rebecca said as she took the dish, her voice warm but her eyes calculating. "Though you know we're trying to eat healthier. All that sugar." She set the cobbler on the counter like it was contaminated. Dinner was catered. Rebecca had ordered from some trendy organic restaurant. $67 for 3 meals. She made sure I saw the receipt. "I'm just so busy at work," Rebecca explained as she arranged the food on plates that cost $42 each. "I barely have time to cook anymore. Not like you, Annie. You must have so much free time." "I stay busy," I said mildly. "Oh, with the consulting work?" Rebecca's voice was honey sweet. "Michael mentioned you help small businesses. That must be so fulfilling. What kind of clients do you work with?" This was new. In the 8 months I'd known Rebecca, she'd never asked about my work with anything more than polite dismissal. Mostly local businesses, I said. Companies having trouble with operations, efficiency, that kind of thing. Fascinating. Rebecca leaned forward, genuinely interested now. Like what kind of operational issues? I should have recognized the trap, but I was curious where she was going. Well, right now I'm helping a small manufacturing company in Milwaukee. They're having supply chain problems, getting materials late, which delays production, which means they can't fulfill contracts on time. Milwaukee? Rebecca's eyes lit up. What's the company called? Hartman Manufacturing, I said. It was a real company, one I didn't own, one I'd never worked with. But Rebecca didn't know that. And how do you help them? Rebecca pressed. I analyze their supplier contracts, look for inefficiencies, negotiate better terms. Sometimes I help them find new suppliers altogether. Rebecca nodded slowly, filing away information. That sounds complex. Do you work alone or do you have a team? Mostly alone. Small operations like mine don't need much overhead. After dinner, while Michael was washing dishes, Rebecca pulled out her phone. Annie, I just started a new job, she said casually. Head of sales at Preston Industries. It's a big step up for me. My face remained neutral, but my heart rate spiked. Of course she'd gotten hired at Preston. Patricia Hughes, my COO, had mentioned a new sales director in her weekly report. I'd been too busy with my other companies to pay attention to the name. Congratulations, I said. That's wonderful. Thank you. It's actually funny. Preston Industries does exactly what you do, but on a larger scale. We're a business consulting firm. Rebecca watched my face carefully. Actually, Annie, if you ever have a client that's too big for you to handle alone, you could refer them to Preston. We could work out a referral fee. That's kind of you, I said. Not kind. Smart business. Rebecca's smile had an edge now. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. That's how successful people operate. Successful people, as opposed to me. Over the next 6 weeks, Rebecca's questions became more frequent and more specific. At a coffee shop in April, Annie, you mentioned that manufacturing client in Milwaukee. Did they ever solve their supply chain issues? At Sunday dinner in June, do you keep client files like documentation of the work you do? I gave her exactly what she was looking for. Enough information to seem helpful, but not enough to seem suspicious. I mentioned clients who didn't exist. I described problems I'd never solved. I created a fictional version of my business that was small, struggling, and full of useful intelligence. Rebecca took it all, every word, every detail, and then she started using it. The first client Preston Industries stole from me was announced at Sunday dinner on July 14th, 2020. Rebecca arrived in a new BMW. Company car, she announced as she climbed out, her smile triumphant. Part of my new compensation package. The car was worth $68,000. Rebecca had been at Preston Industries for 4 months. Over dinner, more catered food, this time $112. Rebecca could barely contain her excitement. I closed the biggest deal of my career today, she said, practically vibrating. Henderson Manufacturing. They're based in Milwaukee, and they were working with some small-time consultant who couldn't handle their supply chain issues. I swooped in, showed them what a real consulting firm could do, and they signed a 3-year contract. $2.4 million. My hand didn't shake as I lifted my water glass, but it took effort. Henderson Manufacturing didn't exist. I'd invented them 2 months ago during a conversation with Rebecca. They didn't exist, but Hartman Manufacturing did, the company I'd actually mentioned that first night. Rebecca had taken my fictional company name, found a real company that matched the profile, researched them, and stolen them. That's wonderful, Rebecca, I said calmly. It really is. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, satisfied. The previous consultant was charging them practically nothing. We're charging them market rate. That's the difference between amateur hour and professional service. Michael beamed at his wife. I'm so proud of you, babe. Thanks, honey. Rebecca turned to me. Annie, I have to thank you too. Remember when you told me about supply chain issues? That conversation actually helped me understand Henderson's problems better. She was telling me she'd stolen from me. Right to my face, daring me to react. I smiled. I'm glad I could help. Over the next 4 months, Rebecca closed 5 more deals. each one a client or company profile I'd mentioned during our family dinners. August 2020, Morrison Medical Supplies, $3. $2 million, 3-year contract. September 2020, Lakeside Logistics, $1.8 million, 2-year contract. October 2020, Grayson Pharmaceuticals, $2.8 million, 4-year contract. November 2020, Turner Manufacturing, $4.1 million, 5-year contract. December 2020, Redfield Distribution, $1.9 million, 2-year contract. Total value, $15.8 million in stolen contracts. Rebecca's commission rate at Preston, 15% of first-year contract value. Rebecca's commissions from My Intelligence, approximately $847,000. Every Sunday, Rebecca arrived in more expensive clothes, more expensive jewelry. She talked about bonuses, promotions, partnership track. She glowed with success built on information stolen from her mother-in-law's dinner table. Michael worshipped her. "Mom, isn't Rebecca amazing?" he said one night as we cleared dishes. "She's only been at Preston 6 months and she's already their top salesperson." "She's very impressive," I agreed. "She works so hard. She's up until midnight most nights, researching clients, building proposals." Michael paused. "You know what she told me? She wants to help you grow your business. She thinks you have so much potential." I looked at my son, this man who had no idea his mother owned a business empire or that his wife was a professional con artist. I should have told him right then. Instead, I kissed his forehead and said, "I'm glad you're happy, sweetheart." But I wasn't idle. While Rebecca thought she was stealing from a helpless old woman, I was building a case. Week 1, October 2020. I had James Porter begin surveillance on Rebecca. Not invasive, just documentation of her movements, her financial transactions. Week 2, I requested detailed sales reports from Patricia Hughes at Preston Industries. I framed it as a routine ownership review of sales pipeline. Week 3, I discovered that Rebecca had been receiving payments from Preston Industries beyond her salary. They were labeled consulting fees, $8,500 per month for 6 months. Total, $51,000. Week 4, James's report showed Rebecca had opened a private bank account, not joint with Michael. Current balance, $143,000. I called Patricia Hughes directly. "Patricia, this is Annie Whitman," I said. "I have questions about our consulting fee structure." Patricia sounded nervous. She always did when I called, which was rare. "Of course, Mrs. Whitman. What do you need?" "I'm seeing regular payments to Rebecca Sterling classified as consulting fees. Can you explain what services she's providing?" There was a long pause. "Mrs. Whitman, those payments were approved by Richard Preston before he fully retired. Rebecca provides competitive intelligence services. She helps us identify potential clients who are currently working with smaller consulting firms." "And where does Rebecca get this competitive intelligence?" "I'm not entirely sure of her sources," Patricia admitted, "but her success rate is remarkable. Every client she's identified has signed with us." "I see," I said. "Thank you, Patricia." After I hung up, I sat in my home office, the room Daniel used to use, the room I'd converted into my command center for managing 7 consulting firms worth $52 million. Rebecca wasn't just using information from family dinners. She was being paid by my own company to spy on me. The irony was exquisite. In December 2020, Rebecca made her move. Michael called me on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice tight. "Mom, can you come over tonight? Rebecca wants to talk to both of us about something important." I arrived at 6:55 p.m. Rebecca met me at the door wearing a cream-colored silk blouse that cost at least $400. "Annie, come in." Her smile was bright, warm, predatory. "Thank you for coming." Michael was pacing in the living room. He looked nervous. "What's going on?" I asked. "Let's sit," Rebecca said. She'd staged this. The lighting was perfect, the seating arranged so she could stand while Michael and I sat. Rebecca remained standing, her hands folded like a CEO addressing shareholders. "Annie, Michael and I have been talking about your business," she began. "We think it's time for you to consider your future." My face remained neutral. "My future?" "You're 68 years old," Rebecca continued, her voice gentle but firm. "You've built a nice little consulting practice, but let's be realistic. How much longer can you keep working? And what happens when you retire? You don't have employees. Your client relationships will disappear." Michael jumped in. Mom, we're worried about you. You work too hard. You deserve to enjoy your retirement. I enjoy my work, I said. We know you do, Rebecca said smoothly. But there's a smarter option. Preston Industries is interested in acquiring small consulting firms. We could buy your business, maintain your client relationships, and give you a fair price that would let you retire comfortably. The room went silent. You want to buy my business, I said flatly. Think of it as a merger, Rebecca corrected. You'd get a one-time payment for your client list and intellectual property. We'd take over your contracts. You'd be free, Annie. Free to travel, to relax, to finally enjoy life. How much are you offering? I asked. Rebecca glanced at Michael. Based on what Michael has told me about your revenue, we're thinking $250,000. $250,000. For a business that didn't exist. For intelligence gathering rights to information Rebecca thought would let Preston steal even more clients. That's generous, I said carefully. We think it's fair, Rebecca said. Your annual revenue is probably around $80,000 to $100,000, so we're offering roughly 3 times earnings. She'd calculated my value based on the fiction I'd fed her. I need to think about it, I said. Rebecca's smile tightened slightly. Of course, take your time. But Annie, this comes from a place of love. We're family. We want what's best for you. After I left, I sat in my car for 10 minutes. Rebecca wasn't just stealing from me anymore. She was trying to buy me out so she could strip mine my fake client list, and she was using my son to do it. I called Patricia Hughes the next morning. We met at a cafe far from Preston's office. Patricia, I need to know everything about Rebecca Sterling's performance, I said. Patricia pulled out a tablet. She's our top salesperson. In 8 months, she's brought in $15.8 million in contracts. Her close rate is 93%. How many of those clients have we actually retained? I interrupted. Patricia paused. Retained? After 6 months. How many are happy with our services? Patricia's expression changed from proud to concerned. Henderson Manufacturing filed a complaint last month. They're threatening to terminate early because we're not meeting deliverables. And the others? Lakeside Logistics has requested a project review. Morrison Medical Supplies has been escalating issues weekly. And Grayson Pharmaceuticals is in active arbitration with us over contract violations. So Rebecca is signing clients we can't actually service, I said. It appears that way, Patricia admitted. She's underbidding to win contracts, but we don't have enough margin to do the work properly. Show me her contract, I said. Patricia pulled it up. Standard employment agreement, plus an addendum for competitive intelligence services. The addendum stated that Rebecca was prohibited from disclosing any information about Preston Industries' clients, strategies, or operations to outside parties. It was a non-disclosure agreement. Rebecca had signed an NDA promising not to share confidential information. Then she'd spent 8 months stealing confidential information from me during family dinners to benefit Preston Industries. Patricia, I said, I need a complete audit of every client Rebecca has brought in. Success rates, client satisfaction, financial impact. Everything. When do you need it? By Friday. The report Patricia delivered on December 18th was damning. 15 clients signed by Rebecca Sterling, total contract value, $18.2 million. Clients requesting early termination. 6 clients in active disputes. 4 projected revenue loss. $7.8 million. Potential liability, $2.3 million. Rebecca had brought in $18.2 million and was going to cost Preston over $10 million in losses. But the most interesting item was on page 7. Sterling has requested a meeting with ownership to discuss a strategic acquisition opportunity. Meeting scheduled for January 8, 2021. Rebecca was going to pitch buying my fake business to me. While I owned the company she was pitching to, I closed the report and allowed myself one small smile. Rebecca thought she was playing chess. She didn't realize I owned the board. On January 5th, 2021, Michael called me. Mom, Rebecca and I want to have you over for dinner on the 9th. Can you make it? Of course, I said. Great. Rebecca's really excited. She has some news to share. I knew exactly what news Rebecca planned to share. I spent 4 days preparing. I pulled together every piece of evidence. Bank records showing Rebecca's separate account, $143,000. Preston's financial reports showing $51,000 in consulting fees. James Porter's investigation documenting Rebecca Morrison's background. Client satisfaction reports showing the disaster Rebecca created. The NDA Rebecca signed. My ownership documents for Preston Industries, 67%. Financial statements showing my company's worth, $52.4 million. Everything organized, everything documented, everything ready. On January 8th, I called Patricia Hughes. Patricia, cancel Rebecca Sterling's meeting with ownership tomorrow. And I need you to attend a dinner tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Mrs. Whitman, I don't understand. You will, I said. Tomorrow night, everything changes. January 9th, 2021, the day I stopped being invisible. I arrived at Michael and Rebecca's apartment at 6:45 p.m. Michael opened the door. Mom, you're early. I know, I said. Michael, can we talk for a minute? Sure. Is everything okay? I looked at my son. Tonight is going to be difficult. Things will come out that will shock you. But I need you to know that everything I've done because I love you. Michael's face creased with concern. Mom, you're scaring me. What's going on? Just remember that I love you, I said. Before Michael could respond, Rebecca emerged from the bedroom in a red dress that probably cost $600. Annie, you're early. Perfect. Rebecca's smile was brilliant. Patricia from Preston is coming too. I hope you don't mind. I don't mind at all, I said. The doorbell rang at 7 p.m. Patricia Hughes stood in the hallway, looking confused and nervous. Patricia, Rebecca's surprise was genuine. I didn't know you'd confirmed. Annie invited me, Patricia said carefully. We sat down to dinner, catered Italian, $42 per entree. Throughout the meal, Rebecca was animated, glancing at me repeatedly like she could barely contain her news. Finally, over dessert, Rebecca stood up. I asked everyone here tonight because I have incredible news. She beamed at me. Annie, I've been working behind the scenes on something special. Preston Industries has agreed to acquire your consulting business. We're offering $300,000 for your client list and contracts. You'll be able to retire comfortably. She slid a folder across the table. The offer letter is inside. All you have to do is sign. The room was silent. I opened the folder. Inside was an offer letter on Preston Industries letterhead, offering to purchase Whitman Consulting Services for $300,000. I read it slowly. Then I closed the folder. Rebecca, I said calmly, before I respond, I have a few questions. Of course, ask anything. How long have you been planning this? Rebecca exchanged a proud glance with Michael. About 2 months, ever since we realized you needed an exit strategy. And you've been gathering information about my business during our family dinners? Well, yes, Rebecca laughed. You're so willing to share, Annie. It helped me understand the value of what you've built. I see, I said. And Patricia, you approved this acquisition? Patricia looked startled. No, I wasn't aware of this proposal. Rebecca waved her hand. I was planning to present it to ownership next week, but I wanted Annie to see the offer first. How thoughtful, I said. I reached into my purse and pulled out my own folder, much thicker than Rebecca's. Before you present anything to ownership, there are some things you should know. I placed the first document on the table, Preston Industries ownership structure, with my name highlighted, 67%. First, I am the ownership you were planning to present to. The color drained from Rebecca's face. What? She whispered. I own 67% of Preston Industries. I have since January 2019, 6 months before you started working there. Michael stood up. Mom, what are you talking about? I pulled out the second document, my complete corporate structure showing all 7 consulting firms. Michael, I don't own a small consulting business. I own Whitman Strategic Solutions, a holding company that controls 7 consulting firms across the Midwest. Combined value, $52.4 million. The room was absolutely silent. Rebecca found her voice. That's impossible. You work from home. You drive a Honda. You're poor? I finished. That's what you thought. That's what I let you think. I pulled out the third document, Rebecca's NDA with Preston Industries. Rebecca, when you signed this, you agreed not to disclose confidential information. You've spent 8 months using information from our family dinners about my supposed clients to benefit Preston. You've been paid $51,000 in consulting fees for this competitive intelligence. I pulled out the 4th document, the client list and their status. But here's the problem. The clients you've been stealing don't exist, or they're companies I deliberately mentioned because they're terrible clients. I've been feeding you poisoned information for 8 months. Patricia gasped, reading the client satisfaction report. 15 clients signed, I continued, 6 requesting early termination, 4 in active disputes, projected revenue loss to Preston, $7.8 million, potential legal liability, $2.3 million. Rebecca was shaking. You set me up. No, I said firmly. You set yourself up. I protected myself. I pulled out the final document, James Porter's investigation. Your real name is Rebecca Ann Morrison. You've targeted 3 men before my son. You've destroyed 2 businesses and 1 marriage. You changed your name to hide your pattern. You chose Michael because you researched my family and thought I was a wealthy widow who could be manipulated. Michael had sat back down, his face pale. Rebecca, is this true? Rebecca turned to him, tears streaming. Michael, I love you. Yes, I've made mistakes, but I love you. Mistakes? I interrupted. You married my son as part of a long-term con. That's not a mistake. That's a crime. I looked at Patricia. Patricia, effective immediately, Rebecca Sterling is terminated from Preston Industries for breach of contract, violation of her NDA, and fraud. Patricia nodded. Understood, Mrs. Whitman. I looked at Rebecca. You have 72 hours to vacate this apartment. Michael's name is on the lease. Yours isn't. You can't do this, Rebecca whispered. I own this building, I said. I can do exactly this. Michael's head snapped up. You own this building? I own 12 buildings in Chicago, Michael. This is one of them. I've been subsidizing your rent since you moved in. Rebecca stood up. You think you've won, but you haven't. I'll sue. I'll expose you. You'll do nothing, I said calmly. Because if you violate your NDA, if you contact Preston's clients, if you make any public statements about me or my companies, I will prosecute you for fraud, industrial espionage, and identity theft. You'll go to prison, Rebecca. The fight went out of her. She stood there, shaking, crying, defeated. I stood and walked to the door. Before I left, I turned back to Michael. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I should have told you the truth a long time ago. I was trying to protect you, but I ended up hurting you instead. Michael didn't respond. He just sat there, staring at the documents that had destroyed his marriage and revealed his mother was a stranger. I left them there. Patricia gathering papers, Rebecca collapsing into tears, Michael silent and shattered. I got in my Honda Accord and drove home alone. Michael didn't call me for 17 days. 17 days of silence. 17 days of staring at my phone, willing it to ring. 17 days of sitting in the house Daniel and I had shared, surrounded by the wealth I'd built in secret, feeling more alone than I'd felt since the day he died. Rebecca moved out of the apartment within 48 hours. According to Patricia's report, she'd packed 2 suitcases and left Chicago entirely. James Porter's follow-up investigation showed she'd gone back to Indianapolis, staying with the aunt who'd attended the wedding, the only family member who'd still speak to her. Michael stayed in the apartment, alone. I knew because I drove by twice, not to spy, just to see if the lights were on, to know my son was still there, still breathing, still existing in the world I'd just destroyed. On day 18, Grace Anderson came to my house. Grace was 70 years old, my closest friend for 32 years. We'd met in 1989 at a Black business owners networking event. She'd built a successful chain of hair salons across Chicago, sold them for $18 million in 2015, and now spent her time mentoring young Black entrepreneurs. Grace was one of 3 people who knew the truth about my wealth. She was also the only person who wasn't afraid to tell me when I was wrong. She let herself in with the key I'd given her years ago and found me sitting at my kitchen table, staring at my phone. Annie, she said, setting down a bag of groceries. When's the last time you ate something that wasn't coffee? I eat, I said, Toast doesn't count. Grace started unpacking the groceries. Real food, the kind that required cooking. How long are you planning to sit here feeling sorry for yourself? I'm not feeling sorry for myself. Then what are you doing? I looked at Grace, this woman who'd known me through Daniel's death, through building my business, through every major decision of my adult life. I'm wondering if I did the right thing, I said quietly. You stopped a con artist from stealing from you and destroying your son's life, Grace said, pulling out a cutting board. That was the right thing. But I lost Michael. No, Grace pointed the knife at me. You lost Michael's trust. That's different. Trust can be rebuilt. But Annie, you can't rebuild it by hiding in this kitchen. He won't answer my calls. Because you spent 13 years lying to him about who you are, Grace said bluntly. Not by commission, by omission. You let him think you were struggling when you were thriving. You let him marry a con artist when you could have stopped it. You played God with his life, Annie. And now you're surprised he's angry? The words hit like a slap. I was trying to protect him, I said. No. Grace started chopping vegetables with decisive strokes. You were trying to control him. There's a difference. Protection would have been telling him the truth and letting him make his own choices. Control was deciding what truth he could handle and when. Daniel asked you to make Michael strong, Grace interrupted. Not to lie to him for 13 years. Not to let him marry a woman you knew was dangerous. Annie, you know I loved Daniel like a brother, but he was wrong about what strength means. And you were wrong to keep that promise. I felt tears building, the first tears I'd let myself cry since the dinner. I don't know how to fix this, I whispered. Grace stopped chopping and came around the counter. She pulled me into a hug, the kind of hug only a friend of 32 years can give, the kind that says I love you and you're an idiot in equal measure. You fix it by telling the truth, Grace said. All of it, the parts that make you look good and the parts that make you look bad. You tell Michael why you made the choices you made, and then you let him decide what to do with that information. What if he doesn't forgive me? Then he doesn't forgive you, Grace said. But at least you'll have been honest. At least he'll know who his mother really is. I called Michael that night. He didn't answer. I called again the next morning. Voicemail. On the third day, I stopped calling and wrote a letter instead. Not an email, not a text. A letter, written by hand on the stationery Daniel had given me for our 10th anniversary. 6 pages, front and back. I told Michael everything. I told him about growing up in Atlanta during segregation, about the teachers who told me I was too ambitious for my own good, about the white classmates who wouldn't sit next to me in business school. I told him about meeting Daniel, about his family disowning him, about the 10 years we spent fighting Morrison Pharmaceuticals while barely surviving. I told him about finding Daniel in the garage that November night in 2003, about the promise I'd made, about the fear that had driven every decision since. I told him about building my business empire, not because I was greedy, but because I never wanted to feel powerless again. Never wanted to be the woman who couldn't afford a lawyer, who couldn't fight back, who had to watch her brilliant husband be destroyed by people who had more money and more power. I told him about the mistake I'd made, thinking that protecting him meant keeping secrets, thinking that letting him struggle would make him strong, when really it just made him vulnerable to someone like Rebecca. I told him I was sorry, not for being successful, not for being strategic, but for not trusting him enough to share the truth. I told him I loved him, that I'd always loved him, that every choice I'd made, right or wrong, had been driven by that love. I mailed the letter on January 28, 2021. Michael showed up at my door on January 30th. He looked terrible. His hair was unwashed, his eyes were red, and he was wearing the same Northwestern sweatshirt he'd had since college, the one with the hole in the left sleeve that he refused to throw away. "Mom," he said, "can I come in?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Daniel and I had eaten breakfast every morning for 23 years, where I'd helped Michael with his homework, where I'd made the promise that had shaped everything that came after. Michael set my letter on the table between us. It was crumpled, like he'd read it multiple times. "I need you to tell me the truth about something," he said quietly. "Anything. Did you ever actually care about whether I was happy with Rebecca? Or were you just waiting for her to screw up so you could prove you were right?" The question cut deep because it was fair. Both, I said honestly. I cared about your happiness, but I also knew Rebecca was dangerous, and part of me wanted to be proven right. Wanted to be the one who saved you. That was ego, Michael, and I'm sorry. Why didn't you just tell me? Michael's voice broke. When you found out who she really was, why didn't you show me that investigator's report? Why did you let me marry her? This was the question I'd been dreading, the question I didn't have a good answer for. Because I was afraid, I said. Afraid that if I told you, you'd think I was trying to control you. Afraid you'd resent me for having the power to know things you didn't. Afraid you'd see me as this wealthy, powerful woman instead of your mother. Instead, you let me find out you're a wealthy, powerful woman who let me marry a con artist, Michael said. How is that better? It's not, I admitted. Michael, I made the wrong choice. I thought I was being strategic, but I was really just being a coward. I was so busy protecting myself that I forgot to protect you. Michael was quiet for a long time. Do you know what the worst part is? He finally said. Not that you're rich, not even that you lied about it. The worst part is that you didn't think I was strong enough to handle the truth. You thought I needed to be protected like a child. You're right, I said. And I was wrong. You're the strongest person I know, Michael. You survived losing your father at 16. You built a business from nothing. You worked 60-hour weeks while your wife was stealing from your mother, and you never complained once. You are strong. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy trying to make you strong my way. Michael looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since the dinner. I'm so angry at you, Mom, he said, and his voice was thick with tears. I'm so angry I can barely breathe. You spent my whole life teaching me about honesty and integrity, and then you lied to me for 13 years. I know, I said, but I'm also... Michael's voice cracked. I'm also angry at myself, because Rebecca stole from you for 8 months and I didn't see it. I brought her into your life. I told her things about you that she used against you. I was so desperate to prove I'd found someone successful that I ignored every warning sign. Michael, that's not your fault, isn't it? Michael looked at me with Daniel's eyes, the same eyes that had looked at me with defeat after Morrison Pharmaceuticals destroyed him. You asked me once if Rebecca loved me for me, and I got angry because I knew the answer. I knew she was with me because I was useful, because I had connections, because she thought she could use me. But I didn't want to admit it, because then I'd have to admit I was exactly like Dad, someone who got used by people smarter and more ruthless than me. My heart broke. You are nothing like your father, I said firmly. Your father was brilliant and kind and brave enough to love me when the world told him not to. He fought for 10 years against people who had all the power and all the money, and he won. He won, Michael. He got his patent back. He got justice. The fact that it cost him so much doesn't make him weak. It makes him a warrior. But you still had to save him, Michael said. That night in the garage, you had to save him because he couldn't save himself. And you think that makes him weak? I asked. Michael, asking for help isn't weakness. Accepting help isn't weakness. Your father's only mistake was thinking he had to fight alone. My mistake was making you think you had to fight alone too. Michael was crying now, the kind of crying that comes from years of holding everything in. I don't want to fight alone anymore, Mom, he said, but I don't know how to trust you again. I know, I said, and I'm not asking you to trust me today. I'm just asking you to let me try to earn it back. 2 weeks after Michael's visit, James Porter called me with news about Rebecca. Mrs. Whitman, I thought you should know. Rebecca Morrison was arrested in Indianapolis yesterday. My stomach dropped. For what? Fraud and identity theft, but not related to you or Michael. This is about a man she targeted before she met your son, Thomas Brennan, the one whose father's manufacturing company went bankrupt. He's been investigating her for 3 years. When he heard about what happened in Chicago, he reached out to share information. Turns out Rebecca stole more than business intelligence from him. She stole $73,000 from his personal accounts. Is he pressing charges? Already did. Rebecca's bail is set at $50,000. Her aunt can't cover it. I thanked James and hung up. Then I sat in my office for 3 hours thinking about Rebecca Morrison, the girl who grew up poor in Indianapolis, who lost her mother at 12 and grew up with an abusive father, who was brilliant but learned that brilliance alone wasn't enough. You needed connections. You needed access. You needed to be willing to do things other people wouldn't do. Rebecca had made terrible choices, criminal choices, but she'd made them because she'd grown up in a world that punished poverty and rewarded ruthlessness. I couldn't forgive what she'd done to Michael, but I understood why she'd done it. I called Grace. "I need your advice on something," I said. "And before you give it, I need you to know I've already made up my mind. I just need to hear you tell me I'm not crazy." "This is already a bad start," Grace said. "What are you planning to do?" "I'm going to pay Rebecca Morrison's bail." Silence. "Grace?" "Annie, that woman tried to destroy you and your son. Why in God's name would you help her?" "Because someone should have helped her a long time ago," I said. "Before she became Rebecca Morrison, the con artist. When she was just Rebecca, the 12-year-old girl whose mother left and whose father told her she was worthless. Maybe if someone had helped her then, she wouldn't have become this." "You can't save everyone, Annie." "I'm not trying to save her," I said. "I'm trying to give her one chance to save herself. If she takes it, great. If she doesn't, that's her choice. But at least I'll know I tried." Grace sighed. "You're going to do this no matter what I say, aren't you?" "Yes." "Then do it," Grace said. "But Annie, don't tell Michael. Not yet. He's not ready to understand this kind of mercy." I paid Rebecca's bail through my lawyer, $50,000. I also hired a criminal defense attorney for her, not an expensive one, but someone competent who would give her a fair chance. I sent one message through the attorney. You have a choice. You can keep being Rebecca Morrison, the woman who destroys people to survive, or you can become someone new. The attorney's fees are paid for 6 months. Use them wisely. I never heard back from Rebecca directly, but 6 months later, the attorney called me. "Mrs. Whitman, I thought you should know. Rebecca Morrison pleaded guilty to fraud. She's serving 18 months, eligible for early release in 12. She also enrolled in the prison's vocational accounting program. She said," the attorney paused, "she said to tell you thank you, and that she's trying to become someone new." I hoped it was true. I hoped Rebecca would find a way to use her brilliance for something other than destruction. But whether she did or not, I'd done what I could. Michael and I started having dinner together once a week. Not at his apartment, not at my house. At neutral restaurants where we could talk without the weight of history pressing down on us. The first few dinners were awkward. We talked about work, about weather, about anything except the elephant in the room. But slowly, week by week, dinner by dinner, we started talking about real things. Michael told me about the divorce proceedings, about the mediator who'd looked at the evidence of Rebecca's fraud and told her attorney she should be grateful Michael wasn't pressing criminal charges, about signing the papers that ended his marriage in a lawyer's office that smelled like old coffee and regret. I told Michael about Preston Industries, about the real problems Rebecca had created, the clients demanding refunds, the lawsuits threatened, the months of damage control Patricia Hughes had to manage. "She almost destroyed your company," Michael said one night over Thai food. "The company you built, and you paid her bail." "I did," I confirmed. "Why?" I set down my chopsticks. "Because I know what it's like to be underestimated, to be dismissed because of where you came from or what you look like. Rebecca made terrible choices, but she made them because the world taught her that being smart wasn't enough. You had to be ruthless, too. I wanted to show her that mercy was also an option." Michael shook his head, but he was almost smiling. "You're either the wisest person I know or the most naive." "Maybe both," I said. "Definitely both," Michael agreed. 4 months after the Revelation dinner, Michael came to my house. Not for our weekly dinner. This was different. This was purposeful. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said as we sat in the living room, "about Preston Industries, about your other companies, about everything you've built." "Okay," I said cautiously. "Patricia Hughes called me last week," Michael continued. "She said you're looking for someone to help manage the expansion of the consulting network. She thought I might be interested." My heart started beating faster. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I needed to talk to you first." Michael looked at me directly. "Mom, I don't want to work for you because I'm your son. I don't want a handout or a mercy position. But I do want to understand what you've built. I want to learn from you. And maybe," he paused, Maybe I want to help build something together. I felt tears building, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Michael, if you come work for Preston Industries, I won't be your boss. Patricia will be. You'll earn market rate salary, not a penny more because you're my son. You'll be evaluated on your performance, not on our relationship. And if it doesn't work out, you'll be fired just like anyone else. Can you accept those terms? I wouldn't want it any other way, Michael said. Then yes, I said. I would love to work with you. Michael stood up and walked over to where I was sitting. He pulled me into a hug, the first real hug we'd shared since before the Revelation dinner. I'm still angry sometimes, he said quietly. About the secrets, about Rebecca, about all of it. I know, I said. But I'm also proud of you, Michael continued, for what you built, for what you survived, for the fact that you're a 68-year-old black woman who owns 7 companies and nobody knew because you were too busy actually working to brag about it. I love you, sweetheart, I said. I love you too, Mom, Michael replied, even when you're infuriating. Especially when I'm infuriating, I corrected. Especially then, he agreed. 1 year after the Revelation dinner, I did something I'd never done before. I agreed to be interviewed for a business magazine article about black women entrepreneurs over 65. The journalist met me at my home, the same modest house in Evanston that I'd lived in since 1982. Mrs. Whitman, she said, looking around with barely concealed surprise. I have to admit, when I researched your net worth, I expected something more elaborate. I grew up in a world that punished black people for being too visible, I said. Especially black women who had money. I learned to be successful quietly. But you're speaking publicly now, the journalist said. What changed? I thought about that question. About Michael working at Preston Industries, slowly learning the business from Patricia Hughes. About Grace's mentoring program for young black entrepreneurs. About Rebecca Morrison, serving her sentence and maybe becoming someone new. I realized that staying quiet wasn't protecting anyone, I said. It was just making it easier for people to pretend women like me don't exist, that black women can't build empires, that you have to be loud and flashy to be successful. So what do you want people to know? The journalist asked. That you can be powerful and quiet, rich and humble, successful and private. That there's no one right way to build something meaningful. And that sometimes I paused, thinking about the promise I'd made to Daniel, about the years I'd spent hiding, about the son I'd almost lost because I was afraid to be seen. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let people see who you really are. The article ran 3 months later. Within a week, I received over 400 emails from young black women, students, entrepreneurs, professionals, thanking me for sharing my story. One email stood out. It was from a 24-year-old business student at Northwestern, my alma mater. Mrs. Whitman, she wrote, I'm the first person in my family to go to college. I'm brilliant at business strategy, but I've been told I need to be more assertive and aggressive to succeed. Reading about you, about how you built an empire quietly, strategically, without performing for anyone, changed everything. You showed me there's more than one way to win. Thank you. I printed that email and put it in my desk drawer next to the photo of Daniel. You were wrong, I thought, looking at his picture. Strength doesn't come from fighting alone. It comes from knowing when to be quiet and when to speak up, when to protect and when to trust, when to hide and when to let yourself be seen. I think I'm finally learning the difference. 2 years after the Revelation dinner, Michael and I stood in the conference room at Preston Industries. We were announcing the launch of the Whitman Morrison Fellowship, a program providing mentorship and funding for young women from disadvantaged backgrounds who wanted to start businesses. Yes, Morrison, named after Rebecca. Mom, are you sure about this? Michael had asked when I first proposed it. People are going to ask questions. Let them ask, I said. Rebecca Morrison made terrible choices, but she was also a product of a system that failed her. This fellowship is for the girls who might become the next Rebecca if nobody helps them, and might become the next success story if someone does. The fellowship would provide $50,000 in startup funding, 12 months of business mentoring, and legal support to 10 women per year. The first recipient was a 22-year-old woman from Indianapolis named Maya. She'd grown up in foster care, put herself through community college, and had a business plan for a logistics company that would hire formerly incarcerated women. When I handed Maya her fellowship check, she cried. "Mrs. Whitman," she said, "why are you doing this for people like me?" "Because someone should have done it for all of us," I said, "and because I'm done being silent." I'm Annie Whitman. I'm 70 years old now. I own 7 consulting firms worth $68 million. I employ over 200 people. My son works beside me, not as my heir, but as my colleague. For 40 years, I built my empire in secret because I thought visibility was dangerous. I thought power was something you had to hide. I thought protecting the people you love meant keeping them in the dark. Only 3 people knew the truth about my wealth: my attorney who handled the acquisitions, my accountant who managed the finances, and Grace Anderson, a black woman my age who'd built her own business empire and understood why I kept mine hidden. Grace and I had met in 1989 at a business networking event. She'd become more than a friend. She'd become my mirror, reflecting back the truths I was too afraid to admit to myself. I was wrong. The greatest power isn't staying invisible. It's choosing when to be seen. The greatest protection isn't keeping secrets. It's telling the truth and trusting that the people you love are strong enough to handle it. The greatest victory isn't proving you're right. It's having the courage to admit when you're wrong. On the anniversary of that revelation dinner, Michael and I had breakfast at the house where he grew up. He made Daniel's terrible coffee. Too strong, too bitter, perfect. "You know what's funny?" Michael said, pouring us both a cup. "Rebecca thought she was stealing from a poor old woman. She had no idea she was stealing from one of the most successful business owners in Chicago." "She knew I was smart," I said. "She just thought smart wasn't enough without money. She couldn't imagine someone could be both smart and rich and still choose to live simply." "Why do you?" Michael asked. "Choose to live simply, I mean. You could afford any house in Chicago." I looked around the kitchen, the same kitchen where Daniel had made terrible coffee every morning, where I'd written business plans at 2 a.m., where I'd made the promise that had shaped everything. "Because this house reminds me of what matters," I said. "Not the empire, not the money. This. Coffee with my son in the house where his father and I built a life together." Michael raised his terrible coffee in a toast. "To empire," he said. "To what matters," I corrected. "To both," Michael Sapt said. "Because you taught me they don't have to be mutually exclusive." We drank our coffee and watched the sun rise over Evanston, Illinois. And for the first time in 40 years, I wasn't hiding anything. I was just being Annie Whitman. And that was enough.